Commander Velteran stood on the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching the human ships approach through the vast darkness of space. His 4 eyes tracked their movement with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen 3 galactic wars. The human fleet looked pathetic, 12 ships. That was all they brought to their first meeting with the Galactic Council. 12 small, ugly metal boxes that barely qualified as starships. Velteran's own people, the Krillians, had sent 50 vessels just as escorts. The mighty hegemony had brought 200. Even the peaceful Altarians had managed 30 ships for this historic occasion. But the humans? 12 rusty metal cans that looked like they might fall apart if someone sneezed too hard. "Look at them," laughed Ambassador Crix from beside him. The hegemony representative's scales gleamed with amusement. "I've seen cargo haulers with better armor plating." Velteran nodded but said nothing. Something about the human ships bothered him, though he couldn't say what. Maybe it was how quietly they moved, or how perfectly they maintained formation, or maybe it was the complete lack of decoration or intimidation displays that every other species used to show their power. The human ships just existed, plain and simple and unremarkable. "Their leader is requesting permission to dock," announced the station's AI. "Captain Lee Dae-ho of the Earth. Federation vessel Incheon, let them dock," ordered Station Commander Irix. "Though I doubt they have much to offer the Council." Velteran watched as the human flagship approached the docking bay. Up close it looked even worse. The metal hull showed scratches and burn marks. Some of the plating looked like it had been welded on by hand. No energy shields shimmered around it like proper warships. No weapon ports glowed with contained power. It was just a metal box with engines. An hour later, Velteran found himself in the main conference hall, standing guard as the various ambassadors met the human delegation. His job was simple: protect the diplomats and observe. He had done this 100 times before. The humans entered quietly. Their leader, Captain Lee Dae-ho, was a small man with dark hair and calm eyes. He wore a simple uniform with no decorations or medals. Behind him walked 5 other humans, all equally plain and unremarkable. "Greetings," said Captain Lee in perfect galactic standard. His voice was soft and polite. "We thank the Council for this opportunity to meet." Ambassador Crix barely looked up from his datapad. "Yes, welcome. We understand you represent a single planet?" "We represent Earth and her colonies," replied Captain Lee. 17 worlds in total." 17. Ambassador Irix from the Altarians smiled kindly. "How modest. The hegemony controls 4,000 star systems." "We are a young species," admitted Captain Lee. "We have much to learn." Velteran studied the human captain's face. The man showed no anger at the obvious insults. No pride or defensiveness. Just calm acceptance. It reminded Velteran of the way experienced soldiers acted before battle, quiet and focused. But that was ridiculous. These humans had never seen real combat. They had only been in space for 50 years. The meeting continued with the usual diplomatic talk. Trade agreements, territory disputes, resource sharing. The humans listened more than they spoke. When they did speak, it was to ask questions or offer small suggestions. They seemed almost eager to please. Velteran found it boring. Another weak species joining the Council, hoping for protection from stronger neighbors. He had seen it dozens of times before. Then the alarm started screaming. "Pirates!" shouted the station commander. 3 raider fleets dropping out of hyperspace. All ships defensive positions." The conference hall erupted into chaos. Ambassadors ran for their emergency shuttles. Guards rushed to battle stations. Through the massive viewing windows, Velteran could see the pirate ships, nearly 100 of them, surrounding the station like hungry wolves. "Stay calm," ordered Velteran, moving to protect the fleeing diplomats. "The station defenses will hold until the fleets can." He stopped. Captain Lee hadn't moved. The human sat quietly in his chair, touching something on his wrist. Around him, his 5 companions had also remained seated. "Captain," called Velteran, "you need to evacuate to your ship. The pirates will target you first. You're the newcomers." Captain Lee looked up and smiled. It was a different smile than before, colder. "Thank you for the warning, Commander, but I think we'll stay and help." "Help?" Velteran stared at the small human. "Captain, no disrespect, but you have 12 ships against 100 pirates. You should run." "Run?" Captain Lee stood up slowly. "Commander, These pirates just made a very big mistake. Outside the windows, the pirate fleets were moving into attack formation. Their ships were larger than the human vessels and heavily armed. Battle-tested raiders who had terrorized shipping lanes for decades. The human ships began to move. Veltaran watched in confusion as the 12 metal boxes spread out in what looked like a random pattern. They weren't forming defensive positions. They weren't trying to protect the station. They just scattered. "What are they doing?" muttered Ambassador Crix, who had also stayed to watch. "Something very stupid," replied Ambassador Irix. Captain Lee touched his wrist again. "All ships, this is Incheon Actual. Target package is confirmed hostile. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Time to work." That was when everything changed. The human ships didn't look like metal boxes anymore. Panels opened along their hulls, revealing weapon systems that had been hidden inside. Gun ports slid out from concealed positions. Missile tubes deployed from what had looked like cargo bays. In seconds, the ugly cargo haulers transformed into warships. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was how they fought. The pirates came in fast and hard, using standard raider tactics, overwhelming firepower and aggressive boarding attempts. It should have worked. It had worked against every other species for centuries. The humans made them look like children. Captain Lee's voice stayed calm and polite as he gave orders. "Busan, take the left flank. Daegu missiles spread on the heavies. Seoul electronic warfare suite active. Make them blind." Veltaran watched one human ship, no bigger than a courier vessel, somehow slip between 3 pirate cruisers and destroy all 3 with precisely placed shots. Another human ship used the station's gravity well to slingshot around and attack from an impossible angle, but the worst part was how they seemed to know what the pirates would do before the pirates did it. Every trap the raiders set, the humans had already avoided. Every ambush failed because the humans weren't where they were supposed to be. It was like watching someone play a game where they could see the other player's cards. In 3 minutes, it was over. 100 pirate ships became wreckage and escape pods. Not a single human vessel had taken serious damage. The conference hall was completely silent. Captain Lee touched his wrist one more time. "All ships, stand down. Recovery teams begin search and rescue for survivors." He turned back to the stunned ambassadors and smiled his polite smile again. "I apologize for the interruption. Where were we in the negotiations?" Veltaran stared at the human captain with new understanding. The plain uniform, the modest ships, the quiet politeness. It was all camouflage. These humans weren't weak newcomers begging for protection. They were predators pretending to be prey, and Veltaran had just watched them hunt. 3 months after the Kepler Station incident, Commander Veltaran found himself orbiting a world called Zerion Prime. The hegemony had declared war on the human territories, confident that their massive fleets would crush the upstart species within weeks. Veltaran's orders were simple: observe and record. The Krillian Defense Fleet wanted detailed reports on human ground combat tactics. Everyone expected this to be a short war. Below him, Zerion Prime burned. The planet was an industrial world. Factories, mining operations, and processing plants spread across 3 continents. 2 million human colonists had called it home until yesterday, when the Hegemony Invasion Force arrived. 50,000 Hegemony troops had landed at dawn. Assault mechs, orbital bombardment platforms, and air superiority fighters. Everything needed to crush resistance quickly and completely. The humans had 800 soldiers to defend the entire planet. "Sir," reported his sensor operator, "the Hegemony commander is requesting our presence at the victory ceremony. Expected time until human surrender is 6 hours. Veltaran nodded but kept watching his screens. Something felt wrong. The human response to the invasion made no sense. Instead of gathering their forces for a final stand, they had scattered. Small groups of soldiers had disappeared into the industrial complexes while the civilians had vanished. Where were 2 million people? "Sir, detecting weapons fire in Sector 7, announced the tactical officer. "Hegemony patrol under attack. How many human troops?" asked Veltaran. "Sensors show 3 humans. Against a full Hegemony platoon? 3 soldiers attacking 50? That was suicide, unless—" "Track that engagement," ordered Veltaran. Full sensor detail. The battle unfolded on his screens like nothing he had ever seen. The 3 human soldiers weren't fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like ghosts. One moment they were in a factory building firing from upper windows. The next moment they were underground, attacking through maintenance tunnels. Then they were behind the hegemony forces using construction equipment as cover. But it wasn't just their movement. It was how they used everything around them. When the hegemony troops tried to take cover behind a parked truck, the humans somehow turned the truck's fuel tank into a bomb. When the aliens moved into a warehouse, the humans used the building's own crane to drop shipping containers on them. Every piece of civilian equipment became a weapon. Within an hour, the hegemony platoon was destroyed. 3 humans had defeated 50 trained soldiers. "That's impossible," muttered his tactical officer. "Record everything," ordered Veteran, "and expand our sensor coverage. I want to see what else is happening." What was happening defied everything Veteran thought he knew about warfare. Across the planet, similar battles were taking place. Small groups of human soldiers were taking on much larger hegemony forces and winning, but they weren't winning through superior firepower or numbers. They were winning by making the entire planet fight for them. In Sector 12, a human squad led by someone called Major Park Jiwoo had somehow turned a mining operation into a fortress. The massive excavation equipment was being used as artillery. Conveyor belts moved explosives into position. Even the mining drones had been weaponized. When the hegemony sent 2 companies to destroy the position, they found themselves facing not just human soldiers, but an entire industrial complex that had been turned into a weapon. "How are they coordinating this?" asked Veltaran's communications officer. "We're intercepting thousands of signals, but they're all using civilian frequencies. Factory management systems, mining control networks, even entertainment broadcasts." Veltaran began to understand. The humans weren't just using the industrial equipment. They had turned the entire planet's infrastructure into their command and control system. Every factory computer, every mining sensor, every civilian communication array was now part of their military network. The hegemony forces found themselves fighting not just human soldiers, but the planet itself. "Sir, urgent message from the hegemony command ship," reported the communications officer. "They're requesting immediate orbital bombardment of Sector 15. They've lost contact with 3 battalions. Veltaran switched his sensors to Sector 15 and watched the most impossible thing yet. A single human soldier, identified as Sergeant Kim Taemin, was somehow holding an entire hegemony regiment, not through superior weapons or defensive positions, but through pure chaos. He had triggered a cascade failure in the sector's power grid, shutting down life support in the hegemony-occupied buildings while keeping the human-controlled areas fully powered. The aliens found themselves fighting in darkness while the humans could see everything. Worse, Kim had somehow turned the sector's automated systems against the invaders. Security doors locked hegemony troops in rooms. Fire suppression systems flooded alien positions with foam. Even the building's elevators had become traps. "He's using the building management system as a weapon," whispered the sensor operator. "The entire sector is fighting for him." But the most terrifying part came when Veltaran realized what had happened to the 2 million civilians. They hadn't evacuated. They hadn't been killed. They had become part of the fight. Every factory worker knew how to operate the equipment that was now artillery. Every miner understood the explosives being used against hegemony positions. Every engineer could reprogram the automated systems that were hunting alien soldiers. The humans hadn't just turned their planet into a weapon. They had turned their entire population into an army. "Sir," reported the tactical officer, voice shaking, "the hegemony is requesting full withdrawal to orbit. They're calling this an unwinnable situation." Veltaran stared at his screens. In one day, 800 human soldiers and 2 million civilians had defeated 50,000 professional hegemony troops. Not through advanced technology or superior numbers, but by refusing to fight the way everyone expected them to fight. "Sir, incoming transmission from the planet's surface. It's from Major Park Jiwoo. Put him through." The human officer appeared on screen. He was young, maybe 30 years old, with dirt on his face and blood on his uniform. Behind him, Veltaran could see what looked like a factory floor that had been turned into a command center. "Commander Veltaran," said Major Park in perfect Krillian, "I understand you've been watching our little fight. I wanted to thank you for not interfering." "How did you know we were here?" asked Veltaran. Major Park smiled. It was the same cold smile Veltaran had seen on Captain Lee's face months ago. "We've been tracking your ship since you arrived. Your sensor sweeps are very thorough, but not very subtle. The hegemony forces are withdrawing, said Veteran. You've won, have we? Major Park looked thoughtful. I suppose that depends on your definition of winning. We stopped them from taking our planet, but they'll be back with more ships and more soldiers. How will you handle a larger invasion? The same way we handled this one, replied Major Park, by making sure they're not fighting just us. They'll be fighting every building, every machine, every system on this planet, and next time we'll have had more time to prepare. The transmission ended, leaving Veltaran staring at empty space. His tactical officer broke the silence. Sir, what do we report to command? Veltaran thought about his orders. Observe and record human ground combat tactics. He had done that. But how could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he describe an enemy that turned entire planets into weapons? That made every civilian into a soldier and every tool into a gun? Report this, he said finally. The humans don't fight wars the way we understand them. They don't separate military from civilian, soldier from citizen, weapon from tool. When you fight humans, you're not fighting their army. You're fighting their entire civilization. He looked back at his screens where the burning planet slowly turned below them. And their entire civilization knows how to fight back. The Battle of Orion Gate began at 400 hours ship time. Commander Veltaran watched from his position in the neutral observation zone as two massive fleets faced each other across the void. On one side, the Hegemony Grand Fleet, 300 warships arranged in perfect battle formation. Their hulls gleamed with energy shields and their weapon arrays pulsed with contained power. It was the largest military force assembled in 50 years. On the other side, the human fleet looked pathetically small. 37 ships, mostly cruisers and destroyers. No massive battleships, no overwhelming firepower displays. Just quiet metal vessels hanging in space like sleeping predators. This will be a massacre, predicted Veltaran's tactical officer. The humans are outnumbered 10-1. Veltaran said nothing, but privately he agreed. After witnessing Zarian Prime, he knew humans fought differently than other species. But space combat was different from ground warfare. In the void, there were no buildings to weaponize, no civilian infrastructure to turn into an army. Here, numbers and firepower mattered. Sir, detecting a single fighter craft launching from the human fleet, reported the sensor operator. Designation Lightning 7. Pilot identifies as Lieutenant Choi Hana. One fighter? The tactical officer laughed. Against 300 capital ships? That's not bravery, that's insanity. Veltaran focused his sensors on the tiny craft. It was smaller than his ship's shuttle, barely 30 meters long. A single-seat fighter with no visible weapon systems and armor so thin it might as well have been made of paper. What is she planning to do? He wondered aloud. He got his answer when Lieutenant Choi Hana did something impossible. The little fighter accelerated directly toward the center of the Hegemony fleet. Not toward one ship or even a small group. Toward all 300 vessels at once. She's committing suicide, said the tactical officer. But Veltaran was beginning to understand that humans had a different definition of suicide than everyone else. The Hegemony fleet opened fire when the fighter came within range. Hundreds of energy beams and missile swarms filled space with deadly light. Enough firepower to destroy a moon, all focused on one tiny target. The target wasn't there anymore. Lieutenant Choi had somehow slipped between the energy beams like they were standing still. Her fighter twisted and rolled through the missile swarms, moving in patterns that seemed to defy physics. Veltaran's sensors could barely track her movement. But that wasn't the impressive part. The impressive part was where she was leading all that weapons fire. Sir, gasped the sensor operator. She's using the Hegemony fleet's own shots against them. The weapons that miss her are hitting their own ships. Veltaran watched in amazement as the human pilot danced through the enemy formation, always staying just ahead of their targeting systems. But she wasn't just avoiding their shots. She was positioning herself so that their weapons hit each other. Confusion spread through the Hegemony ranks as friendly fire incidents mounted. Ships stopped shooting, afraid of hitting their own allies. But that gave Lieutenant Choi the opening she needed. Her fighter suddenly sprouted weapons. Hidden panels opened to reveal missile launchers and energy cannons that had been concealed inside her hull. Just like the ships at Kepler Station, the innocent-looking fighter was actually a deadly predator in disguise. But even with her weapons revealed, she was still just one small fighter against hundreds of capital ships. What could she possibly accomplish? Sir, she's heading for the Hegemony flagship. reported the tactical officer. At maximum acceleration. A ramming attack? Asked Veteran. That's actually brave. No, sir, said the sensor operator, checking his readings twice. She's not planning to ram them. She's using the local gravity well as a slingshot. Veteran stared at his screens in disbelief. The Battle of Orion Gate was taking place near a massive red giant star, whose gravity well extended for millions of kilometers. Lieutenant Choi was diving toward the star at maximum acceleration, building up incredible speed. She's going to burn up in the star's corona, said the tactical officer, but the human pilot pulled out of her dive at the last possible second, using the star's gravity to catapult her fighter back toward the hegemony fleet at nearly the speed of light. At that velocity, her tiny fighter became a kinetic weapon more powerful than any bomb. She punched through the flagship's shields like they didn't exist, tore through its armor like paper, and emerged from the other side, leaving the massive ship a broken wreck behind her. The hegemony fleet stared in shock at their destroyed flagship. In the confusion that followed, the rest of the human fleet attacked, but Veteran barely noticed the main battle. He was too busy watching Lieutenant Choi Hana. The human pilot wasn't finished. Using the momentum from her slingshot maneuver, she began a series of attacks that seemed to ignore every rule of space combat. She used asteroid debris as improvised missiles. She ricocheted energy beams off metallic space dust to hit targets behind cover. She even used the electromagnetic fields of the star itself to jam enemy communications. How is she doing this? Whispered the tactical officer. Veteran thought he understood. Other species built bigger ships and stronger weapons. They tried to overpower their enemies through brute force. But humans seemed to see the universe itself as their weapon. Lieutenant Choi wasn't just flying a fighter. She was flying through an environment full of tools: gravity wells, electromagnetic fields, radiation zones, space debris. Things that other pilots saw as obstacles, she saw as weapons. When 3 hegemony cruisers tried to corner her near a gas cloud, she somehow ignited the cloud and turned it into a massive explosion that destroyed all 3 ships. When a squadron of enemy fighters chased her through an asteroid field, she used the asteroid's rotation to create a kind of gravitational maze that sent the pursuers crashing into each other. But the most terrifying moment came when she faced off against an entire hegemony battle group, 12 heavy cruisers in perfect formation. Any sane pilot would have fled. The combined firepower of 12 cruisers could sterilize a planet. Lieutenant Choi did something else entirely. She transmitted a message on an open channel, speaking directly to the hegemony ships. This is Lightning 7. I'm going to destroy all 12 of your ships in the next 60 seconds. I'm telling you this as a courtesy, so you can evacuate your crews first. The hegemony commander's response was predictably angry. You're insane, human. You're one small fighter against 12 capital ships. Yes, replied Lieutenant Choi calmly. I know. 60 seconds starts now. What followed was the most incredible display of combat flying Veteran had ever witnessed. The human pilot didn't attack the 12 ships directly. Instead, she began flying in a complex pattern around them, staying just outside their weapons range. At first, it looked like elaborate cowardice. But Veteran's sensors began detecting something strange. Lieutenant Choi's flight pattern was creating some kind of gravitational resonance. Her fighter's engines were somehow using the cruiser's own mass against them. Sir, said the sensor operator in a shaking voice, she's destabilizing their formation. The gravitational stress is building up in their hulls. The 12 heavy cruisers began to drift toward each other, pulled by forces they couldn't control. Their commanders tried to compensate with engine burns, but that only made things worse. Lieutenant Choi had somehow turned their own mass into a weapon. At exactly 60 seconds, all 12 ships collided in a massive explosion that lit up the entire star. System Lieutenant Choi's fighter emerged from the Yao, fireball completely unharmed. The remainder of the hegemony fleet retreated in complete panic. They had watched one human pilot destroy 25 capital ships using nothing but physics and creativity. As the battle ended, Veteran received a transmission from the human fighter. Unknown vessel. This is Lieutenant Choi Hana. Thank you for not interfering with our operation. Would you like to inspect the wreckage for your records? Lieutenant, replied Veteran, finding his voice with difficulty. How did you do that? The gravitational manipulation, the physics. Lieutenant Choi's laughter came through the comm system. Physics? Commander, I didn't break any physics. I just used them better than the other guys did. When you spend your whole life flying in gravity wells, you learn how to make them work for you instead of against you. You're flying. It's impossible. Only if you think like everyone else does, replied the human pilot. But humans don't think like everyone else. We grew up on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. Weather, earthquakes, predators, each other. We learned to use our environment as a tool for survival. Space is just another environment. The transmission ended, leaving Veltaran staring at the wreckage of 25 hegemony warships. His tactical officer broke the long silence. Sir, what do we report to command? Veltaran thought about it for a long moment. How could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he describe an enemy pilot who used stars and gravity and space itself as weapons? Report this, he said finally. Human pilots don't just fly through space. They dance with it. They make it part of them. And when they fight, they bring the entire universe to the battle. He looked back at the human fleet already forming up for their next objective. Never send a conventional force against them, he added. They don't fight conventionally. They fight like the universe is on their side. Because Veltaran. The message reached Commander Veltaran's ship at 0347 hours. It was a simple distress call from the human colony world of Kepler 442b. The hegemony had deployed biological weapons against the planet's 3 million inhabitants. Veltaran knew what that meant. The hegemony's bioweapons were designed to kill quickly and completely. Any world targeted with them became a dead rock within days. There would be no survivors. His orders were clear. Maintain observation position and record the effectiveness of hegemony biological warfare protocols. The Krillian High Command wanted detailed data on how the weapons affected human physiology. It should have been a simple assignment. Monitor a dying world, take notes, file a report, but nothing involving humans was ever simple. Sir, detecting a single human ship on the planet's surface, reported his sensor operator. It appears to be a research vessel. Designation, Seoul National University Xenobiology Survey Ship Sejong. Any communication from the surface? Negative, sir. The bioweapon deployment was 3 days ago. Everything down there should be dead by now. Veltaran studied the readings from the planet below. The hegemony weapon was called Death Spore, an engineered virus that attacked the nervous systems of most known species. It spread through air, water, even touch. Once released, it killed everything on a planet within 72 hours. The human colony should have been silent by now, but life signs were still showing on his sensors. Expand scan parameters, he ordered. I want full biological readings from the planet's surface. What the sensors found made no sense. Large areas of the planet were indeed dead, exactly as expected. But other areas showed signs of not just life, but active biological warfare. Something was fighting the death spore, and winning. Sir, incoming transmission from the planet's surface. It's human. That's impossible, said Veltaran. Put it through. The figure that appeared on his screen was clearly human. A woman in her 30s with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a simple lab coat over civilian clothes, and her hands were stained with what looked like chemical residue. Unknown vessel, this is Dr. Yoon Soo-jin of the Seoul National University. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. Veltaran stared. Dr. Yoon, you should be dead. The hegemony deployed biological weapons on your world 3 days ago. Oh, you mean the death spore? Dr. Yoon smiled, and there was something terrifying about that smile. Yes, that was quite rude of them. But they made a mistake. Like, what kind of mistake? They used a biological weapon against a planet with a xenobiology research station. That's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except the gunfight is actually a university laboratory, and the knife is really just an interesting science problem. Veltaran felt a chill run down his spine. Dr. Yoon, are you saying you found a cure? A cure? Dr. Yoon laughed. Commander, I didn't cure anything. I improved it. The transmission cut to an external view of the planet's surface. Dr. Yoon's voice continued over images of what had once been human farming communities. You see, the hegemony's death spore is quite clever. It targets nervous systems across multiple species, very effective against most galactic life forms. But it has one critical flaw. The images showed vast areas where the death spore had done its work. Dead vegetation, empty settlements, the gray dust of biological collapse. But they also showed other areas. Places where something had fought back against the spore and won, where new growth was actually thriving in soil that should have been poisoned. The death spore was designed to work against known galactic species, Dr. Yoon continued, but it had never encountered human biochemistry before. Our immune systems. Well, let's just say we have experience with biological warfare. Veltaran knew what she meant. Human history was full of biological conflicts, diseases that had shaped their evolution, plagues that had changed their civilization. They had been fighting biological warfare for thousands of years before they reached the stars. But that doesn't explain what I'm seeing on the surface, said Veltaran. Ah, that's where things get interesting, replied Dr. Yoon. You see, I wasn't just trying to survive the death spore, I was studying it, understanding it, learning how it worked. The transmission switched to interior views of what looked like a makeshift laboratory. Equipment that had probably been used for peaceful xenobiology research was now clearly being used for something else entirely. The hegemony's weapon is quite sophisticated, Dr. Yoon explained, moving between various pieces of equipment. It attacks neural pathways, disrupts cellular communication, causes system-wide collapse. Very elegant, really. She held up a sample container filled with something that seemed to writhe and move on its own. So I decided to return the favor. Veltaran stared at the container in horror. What did you do? I took their death spore and made some improvements. You see, the original version only attacked nervous systems, but with a few modifications, some human genetic material here, some enhanced targeting protocols there, I was able to create something much more specific. The external view returned, showing areas of the planet where the death spore had clearly been active. But now Veltaran could see that something else was spreading outward from Dr. Yoon's research station. Something that was destroying the death spore itself. I call it the hunter strain, said Dr. Yoon cheerfully. It's programmed to target only hegemony biochemistry, specifically their respiratory systems. You weaponize their own biological weapon? Weaponized is such an ugly word. I prefer enhanced for educational purposes. You see, I wanted to teach the hegemony something about human adaptability. Veltaran's tactical officer was frantically working his console. Sir, I'm detecting hegemony ships approaching the planet. A full bioweapons cleanup crew. How many ships? 50 vessels. They're coming to study the effectiveness of their weapon and sterilize any remaining contamination. Dr. Yoon's voice came through the comm with obvious satisfaction. Perfect. I was hoping they'd come to check their work. The hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Their biocontainment ships were designed to study biological weapons effects and then sanitize entire worlds. They had done this hundreds of times before. They began standard atmospheric sampling procedures, sending down unmanned probes to collect data on the death spore's effectiveness. The probes should have found a dead world ready for colonization. Instead, they found Dr. Yoon's hunter strain. Sir, the hegemony probes are malfunctioning, reported the sensor operator. They're sending error messages and then going offline. The probes aren't malfunctioning, said Dr. Yoon over the comm. They're being digested. My hunter strain is very thorough. What happened next defied everything Veltaran thought he knew about biological warfare. The hunter strain began spreading from the atmospheric probes back to the hegemony ships themselves. It moved through their air recycling systems, their water supplies, their food storage areas. Within hours, 50 hegemony ships were experiencing critical life support failures. This is impossible, breathed Veltaran's tactical officer. Biological weapons can't work in space. They can't survive in vacuum. Mine can, replied Dr. Yoon. I made some modifications to help them survive in low-oxygen environments. You'd be amazed what you can accomplish when you really understand biochemistry. The hegemony fleet began to retreat in panic, but they were already contaminated. As they fled toward their home systems, they carried Dr. Yoon's hunter strain with them. Dr. Yoon, said Veltaran, his voice heavy with something between respect and horror. What have you done? I've sent the hegemony a message, she replied calmly. They tried to murder 3 million innocent people with biological weapons. I thought they should understand what that feels like. You've turned their own weapon against them. Better than that, Commander. I've improved it. The hunter strain will only target hegemony biochemistry, but it's also self-replicating and adaptive. Every time they try to develop a defense, it will evolve around that defense. Veltaran stared at the retreating hegemony ships. already showing signs of system failures. They wanted to use biology as a weapon, continued Dr. Yoon. But they forgot something important. Humans have been fighting biological warfare for our entire evolutionary history. We didn't just learn to survive diseases. We learned to use them as tools. The transmission ended, leaving Veteran staring at his screens. On the planet below, human colonies were already showing signs of recovery. The death spore was completely gone, destroyed by Dr. Yoon's creation. But in space, 50 hegemony ships were limping home, carrying with them a biological weapon that would spread through their empire like wildfire. "Sir?" asked his tactical officer quietly. "What do we report?" Veteran thought about the cheerful woman in the lab coat who had just unleashed a plague that could destroy an entire species. "Report this," he said finally. "Never use biological weapons against humans. They don't just survive them, they study them, improve them, and send them back. And when humans turn science into warfare, they don't just want to win." He looked at the retreating hegemony fleet, already beginning to show signs of complete systems failure. They want to teach lessons, and their lessons are always permanent. The final battle for human space began with the largest military fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Commander. Veteran watched from his observation post as 5,000 hegemony warships moved toward the edge of human territory. Every major species in the galaxy had contributed ships to this armada. The goal was simple: end the human threat once and for all. After Dr. Yoon's hunter strain had swept through 17 hegemony worlds, killing billions, the galaxy had finally understood what they were facing. Humans weren't just another species seeking territory and resources. They were something entirely different. Something that turned every tool into a weapon, every defense into an attack, every act of war into a lesson in terror. The galaxy had decided that humans were too dangerous to exist. "Sir, the human fleet is taking position at the Kepler defense line," reported Veteran's tactical officer. "Sensors count. 10 ships. 10 ships?" Veteran checked his readings twice. "Against 5,000? "Confirmed, sir. 10 human vessels commanded by Admiral Song Woo-hyun aboard the flagship Incheon." Veteran stared at the tactical display. 10 ships. The humans were sending 10 ships against the largest military force in galactic history. It wasn't bravery anymore. It was madness. Unless it wasn't. 3 months of observing human warfare had taught Veteran one thing. When humans looked insane, they were usually just thinking differently than everyone else. "Open a channel to the human flagship," he ordered. The image that appeared on his screen was familiar. Admiral Song Woo-hyun, the same quiet human who had been Captain Lee's second in command at Kepler Station. He looked older now, tired, but his eyes held the same cold intelligence that Veteran had learned to fear. "Admiral Song," said Veteran carefully, "I am required to offer you the opportunity to surrender. The combined galactic fleet has orders to accept your unconditional capitulation." Admiral Song smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Veteran had ever seen. "Commander Veteran, thank you for the offer, but we'll have to decline. We have other plans." "Admiral, you're facing 5,000 ships with 10. This isn't warfare, it's suicide, is it?" Admiral Song looked thoughtful. "I suppose that depends on how you define victory." "Tell me, Commander, what do you know about human psychology?" The question caught Veteran off guard. What do you mean?" "Human psychology. The way our minds work. You've been observing us for months. What have you learned about how humans think?" Veteran considered the question carefully. You think differently than other species. You see opportunities where others see obstacles. You turn everything around you into weapons." "True, but that's just the surface level," replied Admiral Song. "The real difference is deeper. You see, most species think individually. Each ship, each soldier, each commander makes their own decisions based on their own information. But humans think collectively." "I don't understand." "You will," said Admiral Song. "Watch carefully, Commander. You're about to see something that has never been tried in galactic warfare." The transmission ended, leaving Veteran staring at the tactical display. The massive galactic armada was moving into attack formation. 5,000 ships arranged in perfect battle groups ready to overwhelm the tiny human fleet through sheer numbers. But the humans weren't even trying to fight. "Sir, the human ships are retreating," reported the tactical officer. "They're falling back toward their own territory." "Confirmed retreat," added the sensor operator. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. Some kind of general message. Put it through, ordered Veteran. Admiral Song's voice filled the bridge. To all galactic forces, this is Admiral Song Woo-hyun of the Human Defense Fleet. We are withdrawing from this engagement. You have won. Human space is now open for occupation. The message repeated in dozens of languages, broadcast across every communication frequency. A complete surrender. Sir, the Galactic Fleet is celebrating, reported the communications officer. They think they've won without firing a shot. Veteran watched as the massive armada began moving into human territory, occupying star systems and claiming victory. It should have been over. But Veteran had learned not to trust anything that seemed simple where humans were concerned. Maintain full sensor coverage, he ordered. Something's wrong, he was right. The first sign of trouble came 6 hours later, when forward elements of the Galactic Fleet began reporting strange behavior from their support vessels. Sir, the Altarian supply ships are refusing to transfer food to the Krillian battle group, reported his communications officer. They claim the Krillians have been stealing their territory allocations. That's impossible. The territory divisions were agreed upon before the fleet launched, but more reports were coming in. Hegemony commanders were accusing Zephyrian forces of planning to claim the best human worlds for themselves. Zephyrian admirals were reporting that Altarian ships were positioning themselves to block access to strategic resources. Within hours, the unified galactic fleet was fracturing into suspicious, hostile groups. How is this happening? Demanded Veltaran's tactical officer. They're allies. Veltaran began to understand what Admiral Song had meant about human psychology. Get me detailed communication logs from the galactic fleet. Everything they've transmitted since entering human space. The logs revealed the truth. The galactic fleet was receiving thousands of messages, intelligence reports, resource surveys, territorial assessments, all apparently from their own command structures. All completely believable and all lies. Sir, these reports, they're not from Galactic Fleet Command. They're coming from human sources, but they're perfectly formatted as official military communications. Veltaran stared at the communication analysis. The humans are feeding them false information? Not just false information, sir. Targeted psychological manipulation. Each species is receiving reports designed to make them suspicious of their allies. The humans somehow know exactly what each species fears most about their partners. The hegemony feared that other species would claim the best territory. The Altarians worried about being excluded from resource sharing. The Krillians suspected everyone else of planning to betray them after the war, and the humans were feeding each group intelligence that confirmed their worst fears about the others. But how? Asked the tactical officer. How do they know what each species is thinking? Because, said a familiar voice from behind them, we've been studying you. Veltaran spun around to find Admiral Song Woo-hyun standing on his bridge. The human had somehow transported aboard without triggering any alarms. Admiral, how did you? Your ship has been broadcasting sensor telemetry on standard frequencies for months, replied Admiral Song calmly. We've been listening to every conversation, every report, every private communication. We know more about your fleet's psychology than your own commanders do. Veltaran looked at his security team, but they made no move to arrest the human admiral. They seemed as fascinated as he was. The retreat, said Veltaran. It was all planned. Of course. You see, Commander, the galaxy made a mistake. You assumed that because we're outnumbered, we would fight like other species fight. Ship against ship, weapon against weapon. But we're not other species. Admiral Song walked to the main tactical display, where the galactic fleet was clearly visible, now broken into hostile factions that were beginning to position themselves against each other. Humans learned long ago that the best way to defeat a large enemy is not to fight them directly. It's to make them fight each other. Every species in that fleet has ancient grudges, territorial disputes, resource conflicts. They put those aside to fight us. But those feelings didn't disappear. You're turning them against each other. We're helping them remember who they really are, corrected Admiral Song. The hegemony has always wanted to dominate other species. The Altarians have always resented being treated as junior partners. The Krillians have always suspected everyone else of plotting against them. On the tactical display, Veltaran could see the galactic fleet repositioning. What had begun as minor disagreements over territory was escalating into serious conflict. Ships were targeting former allies. Communication between species groups had almost stopped completely. But how did you predict this? Asked Veltaran. We didn't predict it, replied Admiral Song. We designed it. You see, while you were watching our ships and counting our weapons, we were studying something much more important. Your minds. The human admiral activated a holographic display showing detailed psychological profiles of every major species in the galaxy. Every race has weaknesses, blind spots, fears and desires that can be exploited. We've spent months cataloging those weaknesses, learning how each species thinks, how they make decisions, what they're afraid of. You've been planning this from the beginning, since the day we made first contact, confirmed Admiral Song. We knew the galaxy would eventually unite against us. We're different, dangerous, unpredictable, so we prepared for this day. On the tactical display, the first shots were being fired, not at human targets, but between former allies. The hegemony fleet was engaging Krillian vessels. Altarian ships were attacking Zephyrian positions. 5,000 ships, said Admiral Song with satisfaction. The largest fleet in galactic history, and not one of them is fighting us anymore.